Hello, all. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 16, joined by Chase Robinson and also joined by special guest Chris Clark of Gamecock Central, longtime fan, one of the good dudes in the media business. Before we get to trivial stuff, Chris, I know you guys got hit by the aftermath of the hurricane, not as hard as a lot of folks, but our prayers go out to the folks in the Carolinas. And I think you turned out well, relatively speaking, but I still know it's been a challenge. Just want to wish you guys well. How are things in Columbia with most people?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. Thanks for having me. Yeah, things are good. I'm joining you live. Appreciate y'all being willing to deal with a
From
less than
nature.
optimal setup. Yeah, I'm coming from nature. I got the brick wall of my home behind you, which I mean, heck, that's like you said, man. A lot of people in Western North Carolina and a lot of other places have had their homes washed away. Whole
Yeah.
towns, Asheville, which is I think you've been there, Chris. Great
Oh
town.
gosh,
It's really
devastated.
struggling. Yeah, it's devastating to see all that lives lost, and so we are just fine here. We still don't have power at the Clark household for several days, but that's okay. We're making it just fine in a relative sense. So but yeah, so much damage and devastation that I honestly think a lot of people didn't see coming. We knew a storm was
Yeah.
coming. We were trying to kind of prepare, but what we got ended up being a good bit worse. But we didn't see nearly the worst of it. But the community's been awesome here, and certainly I join your thoughts and prayers, and hopefully when we get situated, we can go help some folks too
Yeah.
here soon.
Well,
Yep.
glad to hear that. I'll start with the first football question. Chase and I just did another show. We were grading all the SEC teams for their season
hmm
so far. What kind of grade would you give the Gamecocks?
Oh man, thought you said this is going to be easy questions and come out fires.
Well, you're smart enough. It should be easy for you.
Well, here's the thing. As soon as you said that, I'm sitting here going, if South Carolina was sitting here 4-0, it'd be very easy to say they get an
Yeah.
A. But heck, you probably give them an A plus if they're 4-0.
Mhm.
They do have a loss, and we do not have time. I'm not going to hijack your show with a show about SEC officiating and all
Hey,
those things.
there will be no rant you can give us that we haven't already aired on this show, including the day it happened. So we're there with
Yeah.
you.
So it's rough. I mean, so you guys know what I'm talking about, and a lot of people talked about the hits on the quarterback, one of which I think was actually a good call, one of which was questionable at best. But there are a lot
Mhm.
of other calls in the game that didn't get as much airtime that were pretty bad. But regardless, look, South Carolina exited that game feeling like they should have won for a variety of reasons. Some self-inflicted, some that kind of didn't really go your way, right? Um, it was interesting, Chris, that LSU loss. Normally, you guys know how the SEC is, obviously. Normally, a team loses a game, everything is bad, right?
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't even play the rest of the season, probably should fire everybody, etc. And, the LSU loss actually galvanized, I think, the entire fan base because the majority of the fan base was like, we got hosed. Whether or not you agree with that, a lot of people felt that way. And the team, I think, as disappointed as they were to lose, knowing that despite the officiating, they left plenty of plays on the field as well. They're sitting there feeling like they played well enough to be 4-0 as well. So I think it's actually boosted the confidence of this team and this fan base. You also have a very difficult stretch looming on a very difficult schedule starting this weekend with Ole Miss. So man, I don't know if you can give them an A because they're not 4-0, but a B plus. I think that's certainly fair. You went out and whooped Kentucky on the road, which everybody wanted to see. You're very competitive in a closely contested, controversial loss. So that's probably what I go with, somewhere in the B range.
And Chris, I go back to last year with the South Carolina team. There was that stretch right there in the middle of the season where I feel like they kind of got behind the eight ball. They dropped those games right in the middle of the year, and we're trying to play catch up towards the end of the year to get a bowl game. And we're just behind. You're entering that middle stretch now with some really tough teams. How important is this for South Carolina for the whole season? This middle stretch of games right here.
So I kind of answer that in reverse. So I think the way that people were looking at, like you guys know, every year you go in and you take every SEC team schedule and you kind of try to set expectations. At the end of the day, even after a couple weeks, but certainly by the end of the year, your expectations, the strength of the schedule has changed. There's going to be some teams that by the time you play that team, it's a tougher game than you thought, or it's less tough, right? Or it's about what you thought. And it was really important, given this stretch that you just referenced, Chase, for South Carolina to not come out of month one of the football season and be 2-2, because then you have, to your point from last season, you've dug a hole where now you've got to go out and pull multiple upsets to get bowl eligible. They would love to have been 4-0, really should have been 4-0, for whatever reason you count. If they played a little bit better against LSU, throw out the officiating stuff, they're 4-0, right?
Mhm.
A play here and there. But they are 3-1. And so they knew, hey, you've got Kentucky early on the road, week 2. You've got LSU at home. Other than that, you've got a couple should wins. There aren't many should wins on this schedule. There's not many should wins for anybody in the SEC because it's such a good league this year. So you really need to be 3-1. Now, certainly the Beamer isn't saying this to his team, but for us analyzing it, can you go get a win in this stretch in October? You've got to go Ole Miss, you go to Bama, you go to Oklahoma. That was kind of coming into the season, the murderer's row. 2 of those games are probably about what you thought. Despite Ole Miss losing to Kentucky, still a very tough game even at home. Alabama, very tough on the road, we thought coming in. I still feel the same way. Oklahoma, a little bit more winnable than you probably thought. Yes, because they kind of struggle on offense. Still a very tough game. So you did what not completely optimal in the first part of the season, the first third, but you held serve. Now you've got a very tough stretch. I think people are looking at it going, hey, go out, try to get a win. Don't go over in this stretch, I think is the most important.
All right, I'm going to ask you about the health of 2 key players next, Rocket Sanders, of course, and LaNorris Sellers. Before I do that, I'll give you time to think through your answer, although I don't think this requires much thought. But just going to remind you, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff. Get in on our $200,000 mega contest. Pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on all the action. Bet online. The game starts here. All right, back to the question. LaNorris Sellers, Rocket Sanders, what's it look like for the Ole Miss game and really beyond?
We'll see. We were kind of laying odds, actually, pun intended, on what the SEC's mandated injury report would say when it first comes out.
Yeah.
And I think Chris Sellers plays, and I think he's close to good to go. I think it's a little bit more up in the air on Rocket Sanders. As I sit here talking to you, I think it is more likely than not that he plays. Is he going to be 100%? I kind of doubt that. That one, but if you had to kind of classify them, I say Sellers plays. He's probably closer. I feel more confident that he plays. Sanders certainly could. And if you made me pick one, I say he does play, but isn't 100%. Jared Brown, one of their starting receivers, kind of in the same boat as Rocket Sanders of being, maybe a little bit more on the questionable, we'll see, probable, somewhere in there, not a sure thing to play as they progress through practice this week.
What have you made of this South Carolina offense so far through the first 4 games of the season?
Well, I think, a huge priority coming into this year, and really it's been an issue at times in all 3 of Shane Beamer's previous years, 21, 22, 23, running the football. They were the worst team in the league running the football last year, one of the worst in the country. They came into this year, guys, that if they ultimately double their rushing output from last year, they'd be about middle of the pack in the country. They were less than 80, or they were less than 90 yards a game last year on the ground. So what's changed? Well, they did revamp the O-line a little bit, got some new personnel, brought in some transfers. Bringing in Rocket Sanders helps. He wants to rush for 1,400 yards for Arkansas in 2022. And then you have mobile quarterbacks. LaNorris Sellers broke off a long touchdown run against LSU. That's the type of thing he can do. Robbie Ashford, who's their backup, who came in for the second half of the LSU game, started and played the entirety of the Akron game because Sellers was out. Very dynamic runner. So really a lot of it's personnel and some of the things they can do offensively. The questions are still pass protection, combined with a young quarterback. That's been an issue. 16 sacks, I think. Going into last week, they led the SEC in negative plays, and about half of those were sacks. So it's been a combo of, a young quarterback starting for the first time, taking a little bit too long to get the ball out at times, the offensive line having some issues, and even the backs and tight ends still having some issues as well in pass pro. So the passing game, I would say, is still more of a work in progress overall, but they can definitely run the ball better than they could last year, which has helped in many situations.
Well, one thing that would help is Nyck Harbor being what everybody thought he could be. What's going on with that, and where's that going? I promise you hard questions, and I think I'm becoming a liar by the minute here.
I think part of the deal, honestly, Chris, with Nyck Harbor is, when you slap 5 stars on a guy's name, and I don't say slap because he didn't earn it. I shouldn't say it that way. But when a guy has 5 stars by his name and you say, truthfully, here's a 6'5" guy who can run 10-1 in the 100 and is maybe a future Olympian, people go, oh, yeah, we need that, and he's probably going to catch 300 balls as a freshman, And it was just, you had to have some perspective because this wasn't Ryan Williams coming out of high school where he is almost as close to a finished product as you can get. In fact, he had never played receiver full time. Also, you consider he spent the spring running track because he's a really good track athlete, right? And so he put on some good performances in the SEC on the track this year. So he hasn't been full-time football. He's still been raw as a receiver. So is he big and is he fast? Absolutely. Still a lot more growth, I think, there to do. We'll see if he ultimately hits it. We'll see. I don't expect him to become this team's leading receiver all of a sudden this year. Can you get a little bit more from him? Maybe. But I think, guys, it's about cleaning up some of the pass pro issues and getting some of the other guys that they already have on the roster who are more experienced, more advanced. I think getting them going would help a lot as well.
Yeah, that will be fascinating to see if they can. Defensively, for South Carolina, again, Ole Miss coming in this Saturday, high-powered offense. They've got some weapons. What does the South Carolina defense need to do in this game, but also as you look through the schedule to kind of solidify themselves in this tough SEC?
This defense, I think, is much improved. They actually played a lot better last November in the last few games. They just couldn't score. They've kind of picked up where they left off, and really the strength is in the front of this team. They got basically every key guy back. And if they didn't, they upgraded. So they have legitimate depth at linebacker. Their front line is really good. I've had some other people in the SEC that aren't South Carolina folks that have told me, hey, their front is legit. LSU has maybe one of the best offensive lines in the country. There were times in that game where they just flat out couldn't block South Carolina. Now, here's the thing, guys. This defense, with how they play like their hair's on fire. And so they fly to the ball. Cole Kubelik from SEC Network said early in the season he hasn't seen a defense in the country that flies around like they do. They do get themselves in trouble a little bit at times. LSU adjusted in the second half. They went to some more quick game. They ran the ball more effectively. So when they've struggled, it's been a few busted plays. There have been some tackling issues in the LSU game. But you saw what they did against Kentucky, guys. Kentucky could not block South Carolina and didn't get into the end zone. And now Kentucky's not a dynamic offense, but that was eye-opening. So I don't know. There's no group on the roster on this team that's more improved than the pass rush, which was not good last year and is now really good this season. Kyle Kennard from Georgia Tech's been probably the best player on the team. Dylan Stewart is a freshman. They've got some depth there. They're pretty darn good there. So they're pretty salty on defense, but man, they've got some tests coming up these next few weeks where it's probably not going to look as pretty as it has because there's some really dynamic offenses.
Chris, I think that the game with Ole Miss is fascinating. I could unpack any one of about a million scenarios ranging from a double-digit win for either teams for regions you can imagine. How are you looking at this one? This one to me is about the toughest one that I have tried to size up all year between two teams.
Yeah, here's the thing. It's really interesting because you've kind of got a strength on a weakness for both teams. Ole Miss has had problems blocking. First of all, Ole Miss was not tested whatsoever until they played Kentucky. That's just the reality. Not trying to have a slight.
No,
that's
you're
just
right.
The reality.
You're right.
They weren't.
Yeah.
And so they play Kentucky, and Kentucky exposes that they, have some pass protection issues. South Carolina has struggled protecting the passer. So that talented Ole Miss front, they're going to cause some issues, I think. On the other hand, Ole Miss has had their pass protection issues, as I just said. South Carolina's probably going to expose some problems there. And they're loaded with talent. I remember Jim Nagy from the Reese Senior Bowl saying Ole Miss had the most draft graded guys per his staff in the country, 20, which is a crazy number. They've done great in the portal. They're loaded with talent. Lane Kiffin's a great play caller. They've upgraded their defense. There's some warts there. And so both these teams have had some warts exposed. On one hand, you may say Ole Miss is more talented and more dynamic offensively. On the other hand, it's at Williams-Brice. It's going to be a great environment. It's a tough place to play. I think, the line is maybe 9.5, 10 last I heard. Probably a little rich. I honestly don't know who I'm going to pick yet as we sit here. I'm going back and forth. But yeah, it's a key game for both teams. I think even more pressure is on Ole Miss. If you go 0-2 in the SEC, and you got to go play Georgia and some other teams later this season, your playoff hopes could be dashed, as soon as this weekend. So a lot of pressure on them, actually.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Gamecock Central has been around forever. Tell folks about what you guys have got coming up this week and where they can find it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been there since 2009. They predate me though. They've been around since 98. So come check us out. Any Gamecock football, Gamecock sports, Gamecock recruiting, come check it out and we'll have you covered. And I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, love you guys. You're terrific. And prayers to everybody in the Carolinas. I think you guys got it easier than most people in that area, but still nothing easy about it. And a lot of people hurting. And I say that literally. I do hope people out there listening will keep your area of the country in their prayers, and you've already been in mine. In any case, all right, Chris Clark's been our guest at Gamecock Central. We are Southeastern 16, where we cover baseball, football, basketball year-round, reach an audience of millions. Caroline.smith at Southeastern 14. If you're interested in advertising, and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. That helps our analytics. Tell a friend. For Chase Robinson and Chris Clark, I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 16, presented by Bet Online.